My name is Sarah Chen, and I'm 31 years old. What should have been a triumphant return from closing the biggest business deal of my career turned into finding all my belongings scattered across the front lawn like a yard sale from hell. But my cheating husband and his mistress had no idea that while they were celebrating their new life in what they thought was my only home, I was about to move into the secret lakeside mansion I'd been hiding from him for 2 years, and cancel every single thing that had been keeping his comfortable lifestyle afloat. Before we dive into this revenge story that'll make you want to applaud, I need to know, what would you do if you came home to find your spouse had literally thrown you out for their affair partner? Drop your most savage revenge ideas in the comments. And if you love stories where cheaters get exactly what they deserve, hit that like button and subscribe because this tale of betrayal and brilliant payback is just getting started. Trust me, you haven't seen anything yet when it comes to what happens when you mess with a woman who's been planning her exit strategy longer than you've been planning your affair. Looking back, I should have seen the signs earlier, but success has a way of making you blind to the cracks in your foundation. My marriage to Marcus Chen had looked perfect from the outside, the power couple everyone envied. I was a commercial real estate developer who'd built my company from nothing into a multi-million-dollar empire, and Marcus was a respected orthopedic surgeon at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. We'd met during my residency, not medical residency, but my brief stint volunteering at the hospital's charity gala committee 7 years ago. Marcus was charming, successful, and seemed genuinely impressed by my business acumen rather than threatened by it. In a world where many men were intimidated by successful women, Marcus appeared to be the exception. Our wedding had been featured in Chicago Magazine as one of the year's most elegant celebrations. We'd honeymooned in the Maldives, bought a stunning Tudor-style home in Winnetka, and settled into what everyone assumed was wedded bliss. I threw myself into expanding my real estate portfolio while Marcus built his surgical practice, and for the first few years, we were genuinely happy. But success changes people, and as my company grew more profitable than Marcus's medical practice, subtle shifts began to appear in our relationship. Comments about how I was always working started to carry an edge of resentment. Jokes about being Mr. Sarah Chen at social events became less funny and more pointed. When I'd land a major deal, Marcus's congratulations began to feel forced rather than genuine. The real problem started about 3 years ago when I closed a $50 million mixed-use development deal that put my company on the map nationally. The celebration dinner that should have been a triumph became our first major fight when Marcus accused me of emasculating him by making more money than he did. "Do you know how it feels," he'd said over expensive wine at Alinea, "to have everyone at the hospital ask me what it's like being married to the Sarah Chen? Like I'm just an accessory to your success?" I'd tried to be understanding, suggesting couples therapy and making efforts to include him more in my professional celebrations. But Marcus's resentment only grew deeper as my business continued to flourish. He started making snide comments about my obsession with work, questioning whether I'd ever want children, and suggesting that maybe I cared more about money than our marriage. What I didn't realize was that Marcus's bruised ego was driving him straight into the arms of someone who made him feel like the successful, important man he wanted to be. Her name was Jessica Walsh, and she was a 26-year-old pediatric nurse at his hospital, young, pretty, and apparently very impressed by Dr. Marcus Chen's surgical skills and 6-figure salary. The affair had been going on for 8 months before I discovered it, and only because I'd hired a private investigator to follow up on some suspicious financial activity in our joint accounts. Marcus had been spending money on expensive dinners, weekend getaways, and jewelry that definitely wasn't for me. When I confronted him with credit card statements showing charges to restaurants we'd never been to together, he'd gotten defensive and accused me of not trusting him. "Maybe if you were home more often instead of always chasing your next deal," he'd said, "you'd know where I am and who I'm with." But I'd known exactly where he was and who he was with, thanks to the photographic evidence my investigator had provided. Marcus and Jessica holding hands at dinner, Marcus and Jessica checking into hotels, Marcus and Jessica looking very much like a couple in love while I was working 18-hour days to maintain the lifestyle that allowed him to afford his affair. The most infuriating part was how he'd managed to turn his cheating into somehow being my fault. According to Marcus, I was too focused on work, too ambitious, too successful for my own good. If I'd been a more attentive wife, he wouldn't have needed to find comfort elsewhere. What Marcus didn't know was that while he was building his relationship with Jessica, I was building something too, an exit strategy that would ensure I came out of this marriage with everything I'd worked for, plus a little extra compensation for the pain and betrayal he'd put me through. 2 years ago, when I first suspected something was wrong in our marriage, I'd made what turned out to be the smartest financial decision of my life. Using a shell company I'd established for business purposes, I'd purchased a stunning lakefront property in Lake Forest, about 40 minutes north of our Winnetka home. The 5-bedroom, 4-bathroom contemporary mansion sat on 2 acres of private waterfront and was worth approximately $3.2 million. The brilliant part was that Marcus had no idea it existed. The property was purchased entirely through my business entity, funded through profits from deals he knew nothing about, and maintained through a property management company that handled everything from landscaping to utilities. As far as Marcus knew, all our assets were joint, and all our money went into accounts he could monitor. But I'd been planning for this day for 24 months, quietly moving money, securing properties, and building a foundation for my post-Marcus life. The lakehouse was fully furnished, stocked with everything I needed, and equipped with a home office that would allow me to run my business seamlessly from my secret location. The irony was delicious. While Marcus thought he was playing me for a fool, I'd been playing chess while he was playing checkers. Every dinner he missed for surgery, every weekend he spent at medical conferences, every lie he told gave me more time to solidify my financial independence and plan my dramatic exit. I'd even gone so far as to have my attorney draft divorce papers months in advance, along with a detailed accounting of our assets that would ensure Marcus walked away with far less than he probably expected. Community property laws in Illinois are complex, but when one spouse has been systematically hiding assets for affairs while the other spouse has been building legitimate business wealth, the division of assets can become very interesting indeed. The trip to Los Angeles that would ultimately trigger our final confrontation was ostensibly for business. I was closing a $75 million commercial development deal that would be the largest in my company's history. But it was also the perfect opportunity to let Marcus show his true colors while I was away. I'd suspected that Jessica had been spending time in our house during my business trips, based on small changes I'd noticed: different coffee in the kitchen, toiletries moved in the bathroom, the subtle scent of unfamiliar perfume in our bedroom. So before leaving for LA, I'd installed discreet security cameras throughout the house and hired a private investigator to document whatever happened while I was gone. The deal in Los Angeles went better than expected, closing 2 days early and netting my company a 7-figure commission. I should have been celebrating, but instead, I was watching live security footage on my phone of my husband and his mistress making themselves comfortable in my home, using my furniture, sleeping in my bed, and planning what appeared to be my permanent removal from the picture. That's when I made the decision to return home early and confront the situation head-on. I had no idea that Marcus and Jessica had already decided to force the issue by literally throwing me out of my own house, but their miscalculation was about to become the perfect setup for the most satisfying revenge of my life. As my plane descended into O'Hare Airport, I was already mentally moving into my secret lakehouse and preparing to cancel every single thing that had been supporting Marcus's comfortable lifestyle. He wanted to play hardball? Game on. The Uber driver kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror as we pulled into my neighborhood, probably wondering why I looked so calm despite the obvious disaster scene in my front yard. My designer clothes, expensive shoes, business equipment, and personal belongings were scattered across the perfectly manicured lawn like some twisted garage sale. "Ma'am, it looks like there might have been a break-in or something," the driver said carefully. "Should I wait while you call the police?" "No thank you," I replied, already calculating the cost of replacing everything that had clearly been thrown out carelessly. "This isn't a break-in. This is a breakup." My Kenneth Cole luggage sat in a soggy pile near the mailbox, clearly having been outside long enough to get soaked by the previous night's rain. My laptop bag was sitting open on the driveway, contents spilled out, including client files that were now scattered across the concrete. Even my grandmother's jewelry box, a priceless family heirloom, had been unceremoniously dumped next to the garbage cans. But the most insulting detail was the handwritten sign taped to my front door: "Sarah, your stuff is on the lawn. Don't come inside. We need space to figure things out. Marcus. We need space." As if I were some temporary inconvenience interfering with their relationship rather than the wife who'd been paying the mortgage on this house for the past 5 years. I walked calmly to my car, which was still parked in the driveway where I'd left it a week ago, and retrieved the spare phone I kept for emergencies. The first call was to my attorney, Janet Morrison, who answered on the second ring despite it being 6:30 p.m. on a Friday. "Sarah. How did the LA deal go?" "The deal was perfect. The homecoming, not so much." "Janet, I need you to initiate the divorce proceedings we discussed. Tonight, if possible." "What happened?" I took a photo of my belongings scattered across the lawn and sent it to her. "Marcus and his girlfriend decided to throw me out of my own house while I was closing a $75 million deal. I think it's time to remind him who actually owns what in this relationship." Janet's sharp intake of breath was audible. "Sarah, this is beyond unacceptable. This could be considered theft, destruction of property, and possibly even domestic violence depending on how we want to frame it. How quickly can we freeze the joint accounts? I can have emergency injunctions filed by Monday morning." "Sarah, where are you going to stay tonight?" I smiled, looking at the chaos that Marcus and Jessica thought represented my downfall. "Don't worry about me, Janet. I have somewhere to go that's going to make this whole situation very interesting." The second call was to my private investigator, David Kim, who'd been documenting Marcus's affair for the past 6 months. "David, I need you to come to my house immediately and photograph everything. My husband has thrown my belongings onto the lawn, and I want documentation of every single item and its condition." "Jesus, Sarah, are you okay?" "I'm perfect, actually. This is the best thing Marcus could have done for my divorce case." "How much evidence do we have of him and Jessica using the house while I was away?" "Enough to bury him in court. I have photos, video surveillance, and documentation of them entering and leaving together multiple times this week." "But Sarah, throwing you out like this is going to make the judge very sympathetic to your position." The third call was to my locksmith, who agreed to meet me within the hour to change every lock on the property. If Marcus wanted to play the game of who lives here, I was going to make sure he understood that my name was the only one on the deed. But the most satisfying call was to my property manager at the Lake Forest house. "Hi Margaret, it's Sarah Chen. I need you to activate the property immediately. I'll be moving in tonight, and I want everything ready for full-time occupancy." "Of course, Ms. Chen. Should I arrange for grocery delivery and fresh flowers?" "Yes, and Margaret? Cancel the discretion clause in your contract. If anyone asks about the property or tries to research its ownership, you have my permission to be completely transparent about who owns it and how long I've owned it." As I waited for David to arrive with his camera equipment, I walked through my scattered belongings, mentally cataloging everything that would need to be replaced and calculating the cost. The rain damage alone would run into thousands of dollars, not to mention the emotional value of items like family photos and personal mementos that had been carelessly destroyed. But the real treasure was my laptop bag, which Marcus had clearly searched through, looking for something specific. What he didn't realize was that the laptop contained encrypted files documenting every aspect of my secret financial planning, including detailed records of the Lake Forest property purchase, shell company formations, and asset transfers that he knew nothing about. The fact that he'd gone through my computer showed that this wasn't just about him wanting to live with Jessica, this was about him trying to figure out my financial situation so he could position himself advantageously in the inevitable divorce. Unfortunately for Marcus, he'd been looking for information that would help him, not realizing he was about to discover just how thoroughly I'd been preparing for this moment. David arrived with his equipment just as the sun was setting, casting dramatic shadows across the lawn full of my belongings. He worked methodically, photographing everything from multiple angles while shaking his head in disbelief. "Sarah, I've documented a lot of messy divorces, but this level of vindictiveness is unusual. Most cheating spouses try to be subtle about ending the marriage. This is like Marcus wanted to humiliate you publicly. Marcus always did have a flair for the dramatic, I replied, watching him document the destruction of my grandmother's jewelry box. But he made one crucial miscalculation. What's that? He assumed I had nowhere else to go. As David finished his documentation, I loaded the salvageable items into my car, leaving the damaged and destroyed belongings exactly where they were. Let the neighbors see what kind of man Dr. Marcus Chin really was. Let them gossip about how the successful surgeon had thrown his wife's possessions onto the lawn like garbage. The locksmith arrived just as I was finishing, and I watched with deep satisfaction as he replaced every lock on the house I'd been paying for throughout our marriage. Marcus and Jessica were in for quite a surprise when they tried to return to their love nest. But the real surprise was yet to come. Tomorrow, Marcus would discover that the comfortable lifestyle he'd been enjoying, the joint credit cards, the shared bank accounts, the expensive car payments, the country club memberships, had all been funded by accounts that were about to be frozen faster than he could say irreconcilable differences. As I drove away from the house where I'd thought I was building a life with someone who loved me, I felt nothing but relief. The woman who'd been betrayed and humiliated was gone, replaced by someone who'd been planning for this moment longer than Marcus had been planning his affair. The GPS directed me toward Lake Forest, toward the secret home that was about to become the headquarters for the most satisfying revenge of my life. Marcus had thrown me out, but he had no idea he'd just thrown me directly into a much better situation than he could possibly imagine. Let the games begin. The 40-minute drive to Lake Forest felt like traveling from one life to another. As I wound through the exclusive neighborhoods where Chicago's elite maintained their weekend retreats, I couldn't help but smile at the irony. Marcus thought he'd humiliated me by throwing my belongings onto the lawn, but he'd actually just freed me to enjoy the luxury lifestyle I'd been hiding from him for 2 years. The electronic gates to my property opened automatically as my car approached, recognizing the transponder I'd kept hidden in my glove compartment. The driveway curved through professionally landscaped gardens before revealing the contemporary masterpiece I'd fallen in love with the moment I saw it. The house was everything Marcus's suburban Tudor wasn't: sleek, modern, and unapologetically sophisticated. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of Lake Michigan, while clean lines and premium finishes created an atmosphere of understated elegance. The fact that it was worth nearly $1 million more than our Winnetka house was just the cherry on top. Margaret, my property manager, was waiting in the circular driveway with the warm smile that had made her worth every penny of her substantial fee. "Welcome home, Ms. Chen," she said, embracing me like the friend she'd become over the past 2 years. "I'm so sorry about your situation, but I have to say, you look remarkably composed for someone who's just been through what you described." "That's because this isn't a setback, Margaret. This is liberation." She handed me a leather portfolio containing updated information about the property. "I've activated everything as requested. Full utilities, fresh groceries, new flowers throughout the house, and I took the liberty of stocking the wine cellar with that Burgundy you mentioned loving. You're a treasure. Any word from the landscaping crew about increasing security measures?" "They'll be here Monday morning to install the additional cameras and motion sensors. The existing system is already top of the line, but given your situation, we thought it wise to upgrade." As we walked through the front entrance, I was struck again by how perfect this house was for my new chapter. The foyer opened into a great room with 20-foot ceilings and a stone fireplace that dominated one wall. The kitchen was a chef's dream with premium appliances and an island that could seat 8 people comfortably. But my favorite feature was the master suite, which occupied the entire second floor and included a private balcony overlooking the lake. "I've set up the office exactly as you specified," Margaret said, leading me to what had originally been designed as a 5th bedroom. "High-speed internet, video conferencing capability, and direct phone lines. You can run your entire business from here without missing a beat." The office was perfect. Large enough for client meetings, equipped with everything I needed for video calls, and positioned to take advantage of the lake views that would make even the most stressful business negotiations feel more manageable. Margaret, I need you to understand that this situation might get complicated over the next few weeks. My soon-to-be ex-husband has no idea this property exists, and I intend to keep it that way until the divorce is finalized. I understand completely. I've been managing high-profile properties for 15 years, and discretion is part of the service. However, I should mention that we did receive an interesting inquiry yesterday. My stomach tightened. What kind of inquiry? A man claiming to be your husband called asking about properties you might own in the area. I told him I had no information about any Saracen properties, which was technically true since this property is owned by your business entity. Marcus was already trying to discover my assets. That meant he was planning to fight me in the divorce, probably assuming that his medical degree and surgical income would give him leverage. He had no idea that I'd been systematically building a financial empire that dwarfed his salary. What exactly did he say? He was quite insistent, actually. Said there had been some confusion about property ownership and he needed to clarify some things for insurance purposes. When I maintained that I had no information to share, he became rather rude. I laughed, imagining Marcus's frustration when his fishing expedition turned up nothing. Margaret, if he calls again, you can be even more unhelpful. In fact, if anyone associated with Marcus Chen or Dr. Marcus Chen contacts you about anything, you have my permission to hang up on them. With pleasure. I didn't appreciate his tone. After Margaret left, I poured myself a glass of the excellent Burgundy and walked out onto the master bedroom balcony to watch the sunset over Lake Michigan. The irony of my situation wasn't lost on me. While Marcus and Jessica were probably celebrating their victory in my old house, I was sitting in a luxury lakefront mansion worth 3 times as much, planning their financial downfall. My phone buzzed with a text from my attorney, emergency injunctions filed. All joint accounts will be frozen Monday morning. Marcus is in for quite a surprise. Perfect. But Janet's next text was even better. PI found something interesting in surveillance footage. Call me when convenient. I dialed her immediately. Sarah, you're not going to believe this. David's security cameras caught Marcus and Jessica going through your home office, specifically looking through your financial documents and computer files. That's perfect for the divorce case. It gets better. They were photographing documents with their phones, clearly trying to build a case for hidden assets. The footage shows Marcus specifically looking for information about property ownership and bank accounts. This was even better than I'd hoped. Marcus wasn't just cheating, he was attempting to commit financial espionage in preparation for what he clearly expected to be a contentious divorce. Janet, I think it's time to accelerate our timeline. How quickly can we serve him with papers? Given what we have on video, plus the evidence of him throwing your belongings onto the lawn, I can have a sheriff serve him as early as tomorrow morning. Do it. And Janet? Include a restraining order preventing him from entering or using the Winnetka property. If he wants to play the game of who lives where, he's going to discover that I own the house he just threw me out of. Sarah, are you sure you want to move this aggressively? Sometimes it's better too. Janet, my husband threw my grandmother's jewelry box onto the lawn where it was destroyed by rain. He's been systematically planning to screw me over in the divorce while spending our money on his mistress. I'm not interested in playing nice anymore. After hanging up with Janet, I opened my laptop and began what would be the most satisfying work session of my career. First, I canceled every joint credit card, ensuring that Marcus's next romantic dinner with Jessica would be declined at the restaurant. Then I removed him as an authorized user on every business account that he'd had access to for emergencies. The real masterpiece was my next move. I called every service provider for our Winnetka house, utilities, cable, internet, lawn care, pool maintenance, housekeeping, and informed them that I would no longer be responsible for payments. Since the bills were in my name but I was no longer residing at the property, I was terminating all services effective immediately. Within 24 hours, Marcus and Jessica's love nest would be without electricity, water, internet, or any of the creature comforts they'd been enjoying at my expense. But the coup de grace was yet to come. I pulled up the contact information for Northwestern Memorial Hospital's administration and composed a carefully worded email to the Chief of Staff. Dear Dr. Richardson, I hope this message finds you well. I wanted to inform you of a developing situation involving Dr. Marcus Chen that may impact the hospital's reputation. As you may know, Dr. Chen has been having an affair with pediatric nurse Jessica Walsh, and their relationship has recently escalated to Dr. Chen abandoning his marital home to live with Ms. Walsh. While personal relationships are typically private matters, I thought you should be aware given the hospital's policies regarding relationships between staff members of different hierarchical levels. I trust you will handle this information appropriately. Sincerely, Sarah Chen. Hospital politics are notoriously complex, and relationships between doctors and nurses, especially when one is married, tend to be frowned upon by administration. Marcus's affair might not cost him his job, but it would certainly make his work environment uncomfortable. As I finished my revenge preparations and settled into my beautiful new home, I couldn't help but marvel at how perfectly everything was falling into place. Marcus had thought he was discarding me like trash, but he'd actually just handed me every advantage I needed to destroy him financially, professionally, and personally. Tomorrow, when the sheriff showed up at his house with divorce papers, Marcus would discover that the woman he'd thrown out had been playing a much more sophisticated game than he'd ever imagined. The best part? This was just the beginning. Saturday morning in my lakehouse felt like Christmas morning, if Christmas involved watching your cheating ex-husband's life systematically collapse through real-time notifications on your phone. I was sipping coffee on my private dock, watching boats drift peacefully across Lake Michigan, when the first wave of chaos began. The text from Janet came at exactly 8:47 a.m., Sheriff just served papers. Marcus answered door in bathrobe, Jessica visible in background. You should have seen his face when he read the restraining order. I couldn't help but laugh, imagining Marcus's shock when he realized that not only was I divorcing him, but he was now legally prohibited from entering the house he'd just claimed as his own. The irony was delicious, he'd literally thrown me out of a house I owned, only to discover 12 hours later that he was the one being evicted. My phone rang almost immediately. Marcus's contact photo, a smiling selfie from our anniversary dinner 2 years ago. Seemed almost mocking now. Sarah, what the hell is this? His voice was a mixture of panic and rage. You can't just kick me out of my own house. Actually, Marcus, I can. My name is the only one on the deed, which means it's my house. You just spent the week playing house with your girlfriend in my property while I was working to pay the mortgage you've never contributed to. That's not, we've been married 7 years. Everything we own is joint property. Not everything, darling. You're about to learn that lesson the hard way. You guys, I wish you could have heard the panic in his voice when reality started hitting him. This is exactly what happens when cheaters think they're smarter than their betrayed spouses. But hold on to your hats because what happened next made his panic look like a gentle warm-up. Before we continue with the absolute nuclear destruction of Marcus's comfortable little life, tell me in the comments. Have you ever had a moment where karma hit someone so perfectly you wanted to applaud? And don't forget to subscribe because this revenge story is about to reach levels that will leave you speechless. Sarah, you're being unreasonable. We can work this out. I made a mistake, but throwing away 7 years of marriage over one indiscretion. One indiscretion? I stood up from my dock chair, my voice rising. Marcus, you've been having an affair for 8 months. You've been spending our money on another woman, using our house for your romantic getaways, and planning to divorce me while I was building the business that funded your lifestyle. I never said I wanted a divorce. Really? Because throwing my belongings onto the lawn with a note telling me not to come inside seems like a pretty clear message. But don't worry, Marcus, I got the message loud and clear. The second wave of chaos hit while we were still on the phone. I heard Jessica's voice in the background, panicked and shrill, Marcus. The electricity just went out. And the water's not working. Sarah, what did you do? I canceled utilities for a house I don't live in anymore. You threw me out, remember? So I stopped paying for services I'm not using. You can't do that. We live here. No, Marcus, you're trespassing here. There's a difference. The beautiful thing about being a real estate developer is understanding exactly how to make a property uninhabitable very quickly. By Saturday afternoon, Marcus and Jessica's romantic hideaway would be without electricity, water, gas, internet, cable, trash pickup, and lawn service. The house would be dark, cold, and completely disconnected from the modern world. But I wasn't done yet. At 10:15 a.m., I received a notification that brought a smile to my face. Marcus had tried to use our joint American Express card and been declined. The look on Jessica's face when their romantic brunch was interrupted by a payment processing failure must have been priceless. My phone buzzed with a flurry of increasingly desperate texts. Sarah, the credit cards aren't working. Why are all our accounts frozen? This is financial abuse. I'm calling a lawyer. You can't destroy someone's life just because you're angry. I called Janet to check on the legal proceedings. How's our boy handling his new reality? About as well as you'd expect. His attorney already called demanding an emergency hearing to contest the asset freeze and restraining order. Unfortunately for him, judges don't typically side with husbands who throw their wives' belongings onto the lawn. Any word from the hospital? Oh, Sarah, that was brilliant. Dr. Richardson called Dr. Chen in for a meeting this afternoon to discuss workplace conduct concerns. Apparently, relationships between senior staff and subordinates require disclosure and approval through proper channels. The third wave hit at noon when Marcus tried to return to the hospital for his Saturday surgery schedule, only to discover that his key card had been temporarily deactivated pending the investigation into his relationship with Jessica. Hospital administration doesn't mess around when it comes to potential liability issues, and undisclosed workplace relationships between married doctors and young nurses create exactly the kind of problems they want to avoid. Jessica, meanwhile, had been called in by her nursing supervisor to discuss professional conduct expectations and would likely face her own disciplinary action for engaging in an inappropriate relationship with a married physician. But the most satisfying moment came at 2:30 p.m. when I received a call from Margaret at the lakehouse. Ms. Chen, you have a visitor at the front gate. A Dr. Marcus Chen is insisting he needs to speak with you about resolving this situation. Should I let him in? I smiled, looking out at the lake from my home office where I'd been working on legitimate business deals while Marcus's world collapsed. Put him through on the gate intercom, Margaret. I'd love to hear what he has to say. Marcus's voice crackled through the speaker system, filled with desperation and barely controlled rage. Sarah, I know you're in there. We need to talk about this like adults. I'm sorry, who is this? I don't recognize the voice of someone who throws their wife's belongings onto the lawn like garbage. Sarah, please. I know I made mistakes, but this is insane. You've destroyed everything, our accounts, the house, my job. I haven't destroyed anything, Marcus. I simply stopped paying for your lifestyle after you decided you didn't want me in your life anymore. Actions have consequences. Let me in so we can discuss this rationally. I looked around my beautiful lake house, the property worth millions that Marcus had no idea existed, funded by business success he'd never acknowledged, maintained by money he'd never controlled. I don't think so, Marcus. You see, I've moved on to a better situation. Much better, actually. What are you talking about? Where are you living? Somewhere you can't afford and definitely can't access. Enjoy figuring out your next move from your car, since you no longer have a house or functioning credit cards. As I hung up the intercom, I could hear Marcus screaming my name through the gate speakers, his voice echoing across my private grounds like some deranged ex-boyfriend rather than the sophisticated surgeon he'd always prided himself on being. By 4 p.m., the devastation was complete. Marcus had no access to money, no place to live, a compromised position at work, and a girlfriend who was probably starting to question whether leaving her stable nursing job for an affair with a married doctor had been such a good idea. Meanwhile, I was conducting business calls from my lakefront office, scheduling property viewings for next week, and planning a dinner party to celebrate my liberation from a marriage that had been holding me back for years. The transformation was remarkable. In less than 24 hours, I'd gone from being humiliated and homeless to being empowered and victorious. Marcus had tried to discard me, but he'd actually just discarded the only thing keeping his comfortable life afloat. But this wasn't even the end of his troubles. Monday morning would bring new revelations that would make Saturday's chaos look like a gentle introduction to the real consequences of betraying someone who'd been planning her exit strategy longer than he'd been planning his affair. The best revenge isn't getting angry, it's being prepared. Monday morning brought the kind of satisfaction that money can't buy, but careful planning certainly can deliver. I was reviewing architectural plans for a new downtown development project in my lakehouse office when Janet called with an update that made my coffee taste even better. "Sarah, you need to hear this." Marcus showed up at my office at 7 a.m. demanding an emergency meeting. He looks like he slept in his car, which he probably did since he has no access to hotels without functioning credit cards. "Please tell me you recorded the conversation." "Every word." "He's threatening to sue you for everything from financial abuse to intentional infliction of emotional distress." His attorney is apparently some guy he found through a Google search who specializes in husbands' rights cases. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. Marcus hired a men's rights lawyer? This keeps getting better. It gets even better. He claims you've been hiding assets and demands full disclosure of all your property holdings. He's convinced you have millions of dollars stashed away that he's entitled to half of. Well, he's half right. I do have millions of dollars, but the entitlement part is where his logic falls apart. What Marcus didn't understand was that assets acquired through separate business entities before and during marriage have different legal protections than jointly acquired marital property. My lake house, purchased through my real estate development company and funded entirely through business profits, wasn't subject to the same division rules as our shared Winnetka house. "Janet, what's his financial position looking like?" "Catastrophic. With the account freezes in place, he has access to maybe $300 in cash and whatever's in his wallet. His attorney is working for a retainer that Marcus can't pay, and his client intake form shows he's been living entirely off what he assumed were joint assets." The irony was perfect. Marcus had spent years making snide comments about my obsession with financial independence, never realizing that his comfortable lifestyle was entirely dependent on my business success. His surgical salary covered maybe 30% of their monthly expenses, the expensive dinners, country club memberships, luxury car payments, and mortgage had all been funded by my real estate empire. What about Jessica? How's she handling her Prince Charming's sudden poverty? According to David's surveillance, she moved back to her apartment yesterday afternoon. Apparently, the reality of dating an unemployed doctor with no money and no place to live isn't as romantic as she'd imagined. I felt a surge of vindictive satisfaction. Jessica had been so eager to steal my husband that she'd probably never considered what she was actually stealing. Marcus, without my financial support, wasn't the successful, sophisticated man she'd fallen for. He was just another middle-aged doctor with relationship problems and mounting debts. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. "Ms. Chen, Dr. Chen is back at the gate. Third time this morning. Should I call security?" Before I could respond, the gate intercom crackled to life with Marcus's increasingly desperate voice. "Sarah, I know you can hear me. This is ridiculous. You can't just destroy someone's entire life because you're angry about a relationship that was already ending." I pressed the intercom button. "Marcus, our relationship ended when you threw my belongings onto the lawn. I'm just cleaning up the financial mess you left behind. I never meant for things to go this far. Jessica and we were trying to find a way to tell you gently." The note was supposed to give us time to figure out how to approach the situation properly. Oh, I see. So throwing my grandmother's jewelry box onto the lawn where it could be destroyed by rain was your idea of handling things gently? How thoughtful of you. Sarah, please. Let me in so we can talk face to face. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. I looked around my stunning home office, with its panoramic lake views and custom-built shelving displaying awards for my most successful business deals. This room alone was worth more than most people's entire homes, and Marcus had no idea it existed. Actually, Marcus, I don't think we have anything to discuss. You made your choice when you decided my marriage was worth less than your ego and your affairs. Now you get to live with the consequences. What consequences? Sarah, you've frozen our accounts, kicked me out of our house, gotten me suspended from work, and destroyed my relationship with Jessica. What more do you want? I want you to understand what it feels like to have your entire life turned upside down by someone you trusted. Congratulations, Marcus, now you know exactly how it felt when I came home to find my belongings scattered across the lawn. The beautiful thing about having a private investigator document everything was that I had video evidence of Marcus and Jessica's activities throughout the previous week. David had captured them not just having sex in my bed, but also going through my personal files, photographing financial documents, and clearly planning their strategy for the divorce they assumed was coming. Marcus, did you really think I wouldn't find out about you and Jessica searching through my computer files? Did you imagine that planning to steal my business information would somehow work in your favor? The silence on the intercom told me everything I needed to know. Marcus had been so focused on his affair and his resentment of my success that he'd never considered that I might be documenting his activities just as carefully as he was trying to document mine. Sarah, I don't know what you think you saw, but I have video footage, Marcus. Hours of it. You and Jessica systematically going through my home office, photographing documents, clearly looking for information you could use against me. That's not relationship troubles, that's criminal behavior. Janet called back just as Marcus's protests were reaching peak desperation through the intercom. Sarah, you're going to love this. The hospital just called. Marcus has been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation into his relationship with Jessica and the workplace conduct violations. Apparently, someone submitted additional evidence about his financial instability and questionable judgment. Someone submitted evidence? I wonder who that could have been. The evidence included documentation of his affair, the security footage of him rifling through your personal files, and a detailed timeline of his increasingly erratic behavior. The hospital administration is concerned about liability issues and professional conduct. This was better than I'd hoped. Marcus's attempt to humiliate me had backfired spectacularly, turning him into exactly the kind of liability-creating employee that hospitals work hard to avoid. Janet, what are our next steps legally? Well, Marcus's attorney is demanding a settlement conference, but his position is incredibly weak. He has no assets, no income, documented evidence of adultery and financial misconduct, and a history of attempting to steal your proprietary business information. Most judges would laugh him out of court. My phone buzzed with another text from David, my private investigator. FYI, Jessica Walsh filed a restraining order against Marcus this morning. Apparently, he showed up at her apartment last night demanding she take him back, got aggressive when she refused. Neighbors called police. The implosion was even more complete than I'd anticipated. Not only had Marcus lost his wife, his house, his money, and his job, but he'd also lost his mistress and was now facing potential criminal charges for harassment. Marcus, I said into the intercom, I just received some interesting news about your weekend activities. How did Jessica enjoy your visit to her apartment last night? The silence stretched so long I thought he'd left, but then his voice came back, smaller and more defeated than I'd ever heard it. Sarah, I made mistakes. Terrible mistakes. But I'm still your husband. We took vows. For better or worse, right? Marcus, you voided those vows when you decided that worse meant throwing me away and better meant building a life with someone else. You don't get to invoke our marriage vows after spending 8 months violating them. What do you want from me? What will it take for you to stop this? I considered his question while looking out at the lake, where a family of swans was gliding peacefully across the water. What did I want? Justice? Revenge? Or simply the freedom to live my life without the weight of his betrayal and resentment? I want you to sign the divorce papers, Marcus. I want you to accept that your actions have consequences. And I want you to understand that the woman you threw away was the best thing that ever happened to you. Sarah, please. Goodbye, Marcus. Margaret will escort you off the property if you don't leave voluntarily. As I disconnected the intercom, I felt a profound sense of closure washing over me. The man who'd tried to destroy my life had instead liberated me from a marriage that was holding me back. His betrayal had forced me to activate an exit strategy that left me wealthier, happier, and infinitely more successful than I'd been as his wife. Marcus had wanted to trade me in for a younger model, but he'd never bothered to understand what he was actually trading away. Now he was discovering that Sarah Chen wasn't just a wife who could be discarded, she was a force of nature who'd been playing a much more sophisticated game than he'd ever imagined. The morning's revenge activities had been so satisfying that I decided to celebrate with a swim in my private pool overlooking Lake Michigan. After all, I had a beautiful home, a thriving business, and a future full of possibilities. Marcus, meanwhile, was probably still sitting at my gate, trying to figure out how his brilliant plan to upgrade his life had turned into such a spectacular disaster. 3 weeks after the Great Lawn Disposal incident, I was sitting in the penthouse conference room of Romano Industries, putting the finishing touches on the biggest real estate deal of my career. The $150 million mixed-use development project would transform an entire city block and establish my company as one of Chicago's premier commercial developers. Sarah, this is incredible work, said Alessandro Romano, whose company was co-investing in the project. Your vision for the retail and residential integration is exactly what Chicago needs. The irony wasn't lost on me that while Marcus was probably eating ramen noodles and sleeping on someone's couch, I was closing deals that would set me up for life. His attempts to sabotage my business had backfired so spectacularly that I'd actually gained 2 major new clients who'd heard about the situation and wanted to work with a developer tough enough to handle both personal and professional challenges simultaneously. Alessandro, I have to ask, how did you hear about my divorce situation? He laughed, a sound that filled the elegant conference room. Sarah, Chicago's commercial real estate community isn't that large. When one of our most promising developers gets thrown out of her own house by a cheating husband, word travels fast. But the way you handled it? That's the kind of strategic thinking we want on our team. Janet called just as I was leaving the Romano building, her voice bubbling with excitement. Sarah, you are not going to believe what just happened. Marcus's attorney just fired him as a client. What? Why? Apparently, Marcus tried to pay his legal fees with a check from an account that's been closed for 2 weeks. When that bounced, he tried to trade medical services for legal representation. The attorney realized he was representing someone who's essentially judgment-proof and has no way to pay his bills. I couldn't help but laugh. So Marcus is now representing himself in our divorce? Gets better. He filed a motion demanding that you provide him with temporary spousal support because he's financially disadvantaged due to his wife's vindictive behavior. The judge scheduled a hearing for Friday, and Marcus will have to argue his own case. The mental image of Marcus standing in front of a family court judge, trying to explain why he deserved money from the wife whose belongings he'd thrown onto the lawn, was almost too delicious to believe. Janet, please tell me you'll be recording that hearing. Every word. But Sarah, there's something else you need to know. Marcus has been telling people around town that you've been hiding assets and that you're not the successful businesswoman you claim to be. He's suggesting that your company is some kind of front for illegal activity. The accusation should have made me angry, but instead, I felt nothing but pity for Marcus. His desperation was making him say increasingly ridiculous things, and anyone with basic business knowledge could verify my company's legitimacy with a simple internet search. Let him talk, Janet. Anyone who matters already knows the truth about my business. Marcus is just embarrassing himself at this point. But Marcus's rumors were about to be addressed in a very public way. The Chicago Tribune had been planning to run a feature story about successful women entrepreneurs, and my recent high-profile deals had caught their attention. The interview was scheduled for Thursday, the day before Marcus's court appearance. When reporter Jennifer Walsh, no relation to Jessica, thankfully, arrived at my lakehouse for the interview, her first question made me smile. Ms. Chen, there have been some rumors circulating about your business practices and personal life. Would you like to address those directly? Jennifer, I think my track record speaks for itself. My company has closed over $500 million in deals over the past 5 years, all of which are matters of public record. As for my personal life, I'm currently going through a divorce from someone who seems to think that destroying my reputation will somehow improve his legal position. Can you tell us about this property? It's absolutely stunning. I gave her a tour of the lake house, explaining how I'd purchased it as both an investment and a retreat space for high-level business meetings. The photos would show readers exactly the kind of lifestyle that successful real estate development could provide. The house is worth approximately $3.2 million and sits on 2 acres of private lakefront, I explained as we stood on the master bedroom balcony. I bought it 2 years ago when I realized I needed a space that could serve both personal and professional purposes. 2 years ago? So during your marriage? Yes, though my husband was unaware of the purchase. It was acquired through my business entity using profits from my real estate developments. It's been particularly useful recently, since I needed somewhere to live after my husband threw my belongings onto the lawn and locked me out of our marital home. Jennifer's eyes widened. He actually threw your belongings onto the lawn? Every single item. My clothes, my computer equipment, even family heirlooms. Fortunately, I had somewhere better to go. The interview continued for 2 hours, with Jennifer clearly impressed by both the property and my business acumen. She asked detailed questions about my development projects, my company's growth trajectory, and my plans for expansion. One final question, Ms. Chen. What advice would you give to women who are worried about financial security in marriage? Maintain your own assets, build your own career, and never assume that someone else will take care of your financial future. I've been supporting myself since I was 18, and that independence has served me well, especially recently. The Tribune article ran on Thursday morning with the headline "Local Developer Turns Personal Crisis into Professional Triumph." The accompanying photos showed me in my stunning lakehouse office, looking confident and successful, with a sidebar detailing my company's recent major deals. The article's description of Marcus was particularly satisfying. Chen's estranged husband, orthopedic surgeon Dr. Marcus Chen, recently made headlines for allegedly throwing his wife's belongings onto their lawn during what sources describe as a bizarre attempt to end their marriage. Dr. Chen, who has been placed on administrative leave from Northwestern Memorial Hospital, was unavailable for comment. Marcus's attempt to destroy my reputation had backfired so thoroughly that he'd actually provided free publicity for my business. The Tribune article generated 3 new client inquiries within hours of publication. But the real satisfaction came Friday morning during Marcus's court appearance. Janet called me from the courthouse, barely able to contain her laughter. "Sarah, you missed the performance of a lifetime." Marcus showed up in a wrinkled suit, probably the only one he owns since his good clothes were in the house he can't access, and tried to argue that you've been hiding millions of dollars from him. How did that go over with the judge? Judge Martinez asked him to provide evidence of these hidden assets. Marcus's response was literally, "Well, she must have money somewhere because she's living in a fancy house." When the judge asked him to be more specific, he said, "I don't know where it is, but she's definitely hiding something." That's not exactly compelling legal argument. It gets better. The judge then asked Marcus why, if he believed you had hidden assets, he had thrown you out of the marital home and frozen you out of the relationship. Marcus's answer was, "I thought she'd come crawling back when she realized she had nowhere else to go." I nearly dropped my phone. He actually said that in court. In front of a female judge who was clearly not impressed by his logic. Judge Martinez then asked Marcus if he had contributed financially to the purchase or maintenance of your current residence. When he admitted he didn't even know where you were living, she denied his motion for spousal support and suggested he focus on finding employment rather than trying to claim assets he'd never contributed to. The courthouse humiliation was the perfect capstone to Marcus's 3-week journey from successful surgeon to unemployed defendant representing himself in divorce court. His attempt to punish me for his own failures had turned him into exactly the kind of man no one respects, someone who destroys his own life and then blames everyone else for the consequences. As I hung up with Janet, I looked around my beautiful home office where I'd been building an empire while Marcus was building his affair. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. He'd chosen immediate gratification and emotional revenge, while I'd chosen long-term planning and financial independence. Marcus had thrown me away like garbage, never realizing that what he was discarding was the foundation of everything good in his life. Now he was discovering what life looked like without that foundation, and apparently, it looked a lot like representing yourself in divorce court while your successful ex-wife gets featured in newspaper articles about entrepreneurial excellence. The empire had definitely struck back, and it was more powerful than Marcus had ever imagined. 6 months after Marcus threw my belongings onto the lawn, I was standing in the penthouse suite of the Four Seasons Chicago, celebrating the grand opening of my latest development project. The mixed-use complex had not only come in under budget and ahead of schedule, but it had also won the Chicago Architecture Foundation's Award for Innovation in Urban Development. The irony was delicious. While Marcus was living in a studio apartment near the airport and working at a walk-in clinic in the suburbs, I was being recognized as one of Chicago's most innovative developers. The woman he'd discarded as obsessed with work had built an empire that was now being celebrated by the city's elite. "Sarah, congratulations." Alessandro Romano raised his champagne glass in a toast. "This project represents everything that's exciting about Chicago's future. You should be incredibly proud." "Thank you, Alessandro. I have to admit, this past year has been quite a journey." That was an understatement. The divorce had been finalized 3 months ago, with Marcus receiving exactly what he'd contributed to our marriage, virtually nothing. The court had ruled that since he'd abandoned the marital home and demonstrated no financial investment in our shared assets, he was entitled to minimal spousal support for exactly 6 months. Janet had called me that morning with an update that still made me smile. "Sarah, you'll appreciate this. Marcus's attorney, his 4th one, since he keeps firing them when they can't work miracles, just called requesting a modification of the divorce settlement." "On what grounds?" "Apparently, Marcus believes he's entitled to a portion of your business success because it occurred during your marriage. He's claiming that his emotional support contributed to your professional achievements." I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. The man who spent 2 years telling me I was too focused on work now wants credit for my business success? It gets better. He's also claiming that his medical expertise somehow contributed to your real estate developments because he provided valuable insights about urban planning and infrastructure needs. Marcus knows nothing about urban planning. His idea of infrastructure insight is complaining when the parking garage at the hospital is too far from the elevator. The legal absurdity was matched only by Marcus's personal situation, which had continued its downward spiral since our confrontation at the lakehouse. Northwestern Memorial Hospital had ultimately terminated his employment after the investigation revealed not only his inappropriate relationship with Jessica Walsh, but also his pattern of using hospital resources for personal matters and his increasingly erratic behavior following our separation. Jessica, meanwhile, had transferred to a hospital in Milwaukee to escape the gossip and professional repercussions of their affair. According to my sources, she'd made it very clear that she had no interest in continuing a relationship with an unemployed doctor who'd proven himself capable of destroying his own life over a workplace romance. Marcus's attempts to rebuild his career had been hampered by the reputation he'd created for himself. Word traveled fast in Chicago's medical community, and very few hospitals were interested in hiring a surgeon with a history of workplace affairs, financial instability, and professional misconduct. "The best part," Janet continued, "is that Marcus's current attorney is demanding a forensic accounting of your business to determine how much he contributed to your success. I told them we'd be happy to provide that analysis, along with a detailed breakdown of how much money you spent supporting his lifestyle while he was building his affair." "How much did I spend on him over 7 years?" Approximately $400,000 in direct support, mortgage payments he didn't contribute to, credit card bills for his personal expenses, car payments, insurance, vacations, dinners, entertainment. The man was essentially a very expensive dependent who occasionally performed surgery. The financial analysis had been eye-opening. While I'd been building a business empire, Marcus had been living off my success while contributing virtually nothing to our shared expenses. His surgical salary had gone almost entirely to his personal discretionary spending, including the affair that ultimately destroyed our marriage. But the most satisfying development was entirely unrelated to Marcus. 3 months ago, I'd met someone who made me remember what it felt like to be appreciated rather than resented for my success. Dr. Michael Torres was a trauma surgeon at University of Chicago Medical Center. Brilliant, successful in his own right, and genuinely impressed by my business achievements rather than threatened by them. We'd met at a charity gala for the Chicago Architecture Foundation, where he'd been representing the medical center's community outreach program. "I have to ask," he'd said over dinner, "how does someone build a $50 million real estate portfolio by age 31? That's incredible." The fact that he was asking because he was genuinely interested, not because he was looking for ways to diminish my achievements, had been refreshing beyond words. "Michael, most of my success came from being forced to be financially independent early," I'd explained. "When you can't rely on anyone else to support your dreams, you get very focused on making them happen yourself." Our relationship had developed slowly and naturally, built on mutual respect and genuine compatibility rather than the intense chemistry and unresolved conflicts that had characterized my marriage to Marcus. Michael had his own house, his own money, his own successful career, and his own goals that complemented rather than competed with mine. The best part was that Michael knew about Marcus and the spectacular implosion of my previous marriage, but he saw it as evidence of my strength rather than as some kind of relationship red flag. "Any man who would throw away someone like you," he'd said after I'd told him the whole lawn disposal story, "is either an idiot or so insecure that he can't handle being with someone successful. Either way, his loss is my gain." As I stood in the Four Seasons penthouse, surrounded by Chicago's business and social elite celebrating my latest professional achievement, I couldn't help but think about how different my life had become since that humiliating day when I'd returned from Los Angeles to find my belongings scattered across the lawn. Marcus had intended to destroy me, to force me to come crawling back to him when I realized I had nowhere else to go. Instead, he'd freed me to become the person I was always meant to be, successful, independent, and surrounded by people who valued my achievements rather than resented them. My phone buzzed with a text from Margaret, my property manager. "Ms. Chen, someone claiming to be your ex-husband called again asking about renting space for a small event. Should I continue telling him we're fully booked?" I smiled, typing back, "Yes, we're permanently booked for anyone named Marcus Chen." The final irony was that Marcus, in his desperate attempt to rebuild his social and professional standing, had apparently been trying to rent space at various upscale venues around Chicago for networking events and potential business meetings. What he didn't realize was that many of these venues were either owned by my company or managed by property groups I had relationships with. His reputation had preceded him everywhere he tried to go, and no one wanted to associate their business with someone who'd become known as the surgeon who'd thrown his successful wife's belongings onto the lawn in a fit of midlife crisis rage. So here's what I learned from this whole incredible experience: sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you is actually the best thing in disguise. Marcus thought he was punishing me by throwing me out, but he actually set me free to build the life I really wanted. The secret home I'd been hiding became the foundation for the most successful period of my career. The financial independence I'd been building became the security that let me take bigger risks and land bigger deals. And the strength I developed from surviving his betrayal made me attractive to someone who actually appreciates successful women. Family karma works in mysterious ways, but it always works. Marcus lost everything he thought he wanted: his marriage, his job, his financial security, his reputation, and his girlfriend. Meanwhile, I gained everything I didn't even know I wanted: professional recognition, financial freedom, a beautiful home, and a relationship with someone who celebrates my success instead of resenting it. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever had someone try to destroy your life only to discover they'd actually done you the biggest favor ever? Or maybe you've seen karma work its magic on someone who definitely deserved it? Share your stories in the comments because I love hearing about how life has a way of sorting things out. If this story reminded you that sometimes the best revenge is just living well, smash that like button and subscribe for more real-life drama that proves truth really is stranger than fiction. And definitely share this with anyone who needs to hear that being thrown away by the wrong person just makes room for the right person to find you. Thank you for following along on this wild journey from lawn disposal to penthouse celebration. I hope my story reminds you that every ending is really just a new beginning in disguise, and sometimes the people who hurt us the most are actually doing us the biggest favor of our lives. Until next time, remember that the best revenge is becoming so successful that your ex's biggest regret is letting you go. Much love to all of you. 2 hearts.